Members, if we convene again, please. On your papers, we now go to the Debt Recovery Service, which is on page 29. Before I ask Mrs. Coburn, isn't it? Mrs. Coburn to introduce this item, just to let you all know that she has just been appointed for the Revenue and Benefits Head of Shared Services. So congratulations. Right, would you like to lead us into it, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you very much. This report concerns the progress made with the Debt Recovery Service. The service went live in June 2016 and made a surplus of £172,000 in the first year, which wasn't actually a full year. We are now over halfway through the second year, with income projections matching the £315,000 operation surplus target. The Debt Recovery Service is looking to expand and has been in discussions with Gratian Borough Council and agreed to undertake a trial of the enforcement of council tax, business rates and parking debts for that council. The committee is asked to note the progress made in the implementation and delivery of the Debt Recovery Service, and that delegated authority is given to the Mid-Kent Services Director to negotiate and enter into such agreements as are necessary to expand the Debt Recovery Service. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't think there's an awful lot to say apart from what is the share that Maidstone receives. I'm assuming that's the amount of money that's been made for the whole of the service. So what is our proportion?
It's split equally between Swale, Tunbridge Wells and us.
Could I just come back on one point? I'd be happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you. Did you want to say something, Councillor McLaughlin?
Thank you, Chair. I just want clarification of the various percentages that are quoted here. Your short-term objective was to successfully process 50% of the warrants that you would have passed to the bailiffs, and you've achieved 95% of that. And your longer-term objective is to successfully enforce 75% of the warrants, of which presumably you would still expect to achieve 95%. So I just want clarification on that. And then the second part of the question is, when do you think you'll take over 100% of the warrants previously passed to external bailiffs? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. In relation to the percentages, what's quoted in the papers are the percentages that were set out in the original business case. So when the service was introduced, the aim was to enforce 50% in the first year, and then as confidence in the service grew, increase that to 75% in subsequent years. The introduction went much better than we could have hoped. By the end of the first year, we were processing 95%, so in effect we've accelerated that delivery and achievement of the targets. In relation to completing 100% of warrants, those that we pass out are warrants that are not effective for us to enforce because they're in other parts of the country. So we don't envisage ever enforcing 100%.
Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding, or you are, Steve. Just bear with me. You're saying now then that already you are processing 95% of the warrants that would have gone to the bailiffs? Is that what you're saying? You're processing 95% and you're achieving 95% of them? So you're exceeding your medium-term goal, which was to process 75%. So you're doing exceedingly well in that case, and are to be congratulated if I've understood it correctly now.
That is correct. Yeah.
Well done.
Members, nobody else appears to wish to say anything. It's been moved and seconded. You'll find the recommendations on page 29. It's two parts, 1 and 2. Are you happy to take them together? Could I have a show? Well, the first bit is to note, but the second is delegated authorities. Could I have a show of hands then, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. So if you now move to page 36, it's the Council Tax Reduction Scheme. Mrs Coburn is also introducing this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A report originally came before this committee in July to consider the impact of universal credit on the Council Tax Reduction Scheme when it is rolled out next August. A consultation subsequently took place regarding the available options on the proposed changes and how the many changes will be managed. Option 1 was identified as the preferred option, with a fixed income period being applied to avoid multiple changes. We would not wait until the end of that period to deal with larger changes in income or when someone loses their job, and would pick up those changes as they happen. This would also be the case when someone's died, such as the death of a spouse. A total of 773 responses were received. Whilst we are able to confirm the numbers of those that are or are not in receipt of council tax reduction where it was stated, there were over 25% of responses where they did not specify whether they were or were not claiming council tax reduction. So it is difficult to put an accurate figure on how many of those responses are currently receiving council tax reduction. Although the responses were very close for option 1 and option 2, the number of people who opted for option 1 was slightly more than option 2, and the number of people who responded no was less for option 1 than options 2 and 3. Using this analysis, the results of the consultation would look to support the recommended preferred option, which is option 1. The committee is asked to note the outcome of the public consultation, consider the potential impact of the proposed changes on universal credit claimants, and recommend to Council that the Council Tax Reduction Scheme is amended to incorporate the changes with the preferred option as option 1. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if you could just help me out with my understanding of the consultation. So I'm looking on page 40, and at 5.6, it says the survey was set so customers were able to vote for more than one option. Can you just talk me through how that is then played out in these figures? Because if you vote for more than one option, I'm confused as to what that might mean.
Yes, certainly. When the survey went out, it wasn't set up so people were asked to vote for one option as opposed to another option. So of the 773 responses we received, some people would have voted for both option 1 and option 2. So we've had to look at the actual numbers in both options to actually get the majority. So yes, it does look rather confusing.
Okay, so fair to say I'm still slightly confused by that. And then the other thing that strikes me here is the very high not sure response. So notwithstanding whether the recommendation is actually a good one that we might follow this evening or not, but with that many people saying not sure, I am tempted to wonder if that means they didn't really understand quite what they were being asked. Because I have to say that, reading this through a few times, it's not immediately obvious what the subtlety of difference between the options is unless you really get your head around it. So what I'm really putting to the committee tonight perhaps is that the weight that we can give to this consultation, in my mind, is questionable. So we're actually left with just making the decision based upon the options.
Do you wish to come back on that?
When the committee met back in July, we looked through the options that were available, and the committee did agree to go out to consultation on those options, with option 1 as the preferred option.
Councillor Burton, then I have Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, well, I fully accept how we came to go out to consultation, but just looking at the hard results, given that people voted perhaps or selected more than once and such a high number we're just not sure, possibly confused, I'm just suggesting that the weight that we give to these results maybe should be taken under caution.
Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just wondering if we've actually consulted the correct people. I see it was done online and through social media and the local press. Well, the type of people that would require council tax rebate reduction wouldn't be online, so they can't afford computers and laptops. I mean, even Helen Grant can't afford to buy the Kent Messenger because she claims it back on her parliamentary expenses. So how can we expect people to actually find out this information from the local press? Are we absolutely confident that we've actually contacted the people who are actually in receipt of this reduction?
We contacted 3,200 customers who are in receipt of council tax reduction, where we hold their email addresses, and so we consulted with those by email. So they're actually in receipt of council tax reduction.
Right, thanks for that. But, I mean, how many do we not have email addresses for that we haven't been able to contact? Do we know?
That would be in the region of 50% we would have captured.
I mean, to me, that sounds like quite a lot of people that have simply missed out on taking part in this survey, and I suspect we would have got a totally different response if we'd been able to contact everyone concerned. So, I mean, could we maybe make some sort of effort to contact all these other people that have not responded or weren't able to respond to this survey?
Mrs Coburn.
This is only going to affect those claimants that are in receipt of universal credit. So we don't know how many people that's going to affect at the moment, but it certainly won't be all of our current claimants. So it's only those that are in receipt of universal credit that these changes would affect.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I see that's about 200 people, I gather, from the papers at the moment, isn't it? I think that, I seem to remember reading that somewhere, and it's going to increase subsequently. My question is, can you tell us what the other councils within Kent are doing? Have they finalised their approaches yet?
Some councils haven't done anything at all yet. There are a couple of councils that have taken the same approach as us and going down the fixed income period.
Mr McGuinness, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of respond to some of the earlier comments in terms of the timetabling for the consultation. There is a requirement for the council to approve its scheme by the 31st of January at full council in order for it to take effect for the next financial year. So there wouldn't be an opportunity for the council to rerun the consultation and make changes within the next following year. I would say that the response to the consultation, we would generally consider that to be a high level of response, and we have followed a similar kind of process in previous years in terms of email contact, and again the committee and the response has been positive.
Councillor English.
I think in this day and age it's difficult to actually see a practical alternative to the consultation methods that have actually been used that will produce a significantly better or more representative result. And it's not necessary, for example, to even to own your own computer or have access to your own computer to have an email account. Many people who do have email accounts with Gmail these days rather than Hotmail probably, but it's difficult to see how we can improve on it. But I think at the end of the day we have to look at this and think what is the best thing to do. And looking at it clearly from the point of view of the potential customers and the borough council, what we don't want is to have to send out 35 or so change statements and different demands for payments across a year, which would cost an enormous amount of money, cause great uncertainty to the customers. And so we need a simple solution which keeps the cost down and allows a relative amount of stability to people in difficult circumstances. That means there's only two ways of doing it, and I think the option we've come down to the option one, is the least complicated, the most straightforward, and the most likely to give certainty, which is relative certainty, which is what people need in these circumstances. So I don't see that there's any great benefit in trying to come up with a more representative survey or a different survey, because frankly at the end of the day I think we're just going to end up with either the same result or a result that is no better in terms of being representative. I think we need to just make the decision.
Councillor Gardner.
We've got, I'll put it down, 3 keywords here: onus, stability and revenue. Onus on the claimant, the stability for the claimant, and obviously the revenue for us as the local authority. Councillor English quite clearly tried to explain that option 1 is probably the least onus on the claimant. Is there, what would be the difference with regards to the possible loss or gain of revenue between option 1 and 2, including also enforcement and administrative costs?
If we opted for option 2, that would be applying the tolerance level. Deciding on what that level would be, that would still, it's suggested here, it's set at about £3 a week. That would still affect a lot of claimants, because every time they have a variance in their income, the data from the HMRC is passed to DWP. That would then generate a change to us. The changes, we could be dealing with sending out numerous bills, which would be confusing for the customer, costly for us. And that's why we think that option 1 would be the best option, where we would be able to pick up those cases where there are big variances rather than wait for the end of the period. And that would be less onerous on us as a local authority and less confusing for the customer.
Could you give us an indication of numbers, of figures? How much would option 1 cost the local authority? How much would option 2 cost the local authority?
Sorry, if we went with option 1, we would be able to do that within our existing resources. If we went with option 2, then we wouldn't be able to deal with that with our existing resources, and we'd be looking to bring in more resources to be able to cope with that.
So in effect, option 2 is more onerous on the recipient and less effective, cost-effective to the local authority. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yes.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick question. Roughly how many people do we think this is going to affect?
At the moment, we've got 200 people on universal credit in the borough, and they're the single households. Come August next year, as people change their legacy benefits, they will then go on to universal credit. But it's going to be some time before all of the existing claimants will be changed from their existing benefits onto universal credit. So it's possible it might not even happen in a bulk change in the next financial year. So we could just be talking about another 200 claimants.
Councillor Blackmore, do you wish to come back?
Just to say, bearing in mind that's quite, well, a relatively small number, then whatever your simplest way to do it, surely that's the scheme we should be looking at, because otherwise, even if it is only 200 people, if you then have variances within their income and that happens 4 or 5 times in the year, you could be generating 1,000 contacts with them, which sounds very expensive.
We would envisage that we would be having changes in income every month that we would have to deal with.
In that case, Mrs Coburn, I think option 1 is the only option. I think the other 2 we can discard quite easily. I'd be happy to move on that basis, Madam Chairman.
We need to look at the recommendations because actually it doesn't actually say to recommend option 1. If I can just go through this. The first recommendation is to note the outcome of the public consultation. Despite what's been said, is that noted? All right. I don't think 2 is a recommendation because it's just to consider, and we've discussed and considered. But so recommendation 3 will in effect become recommendation 2, and it should say the committee recommends to council that option 1 is adopted and amended to incorporate the changes summarised in section 3. Is that moved by any? Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Seconded by Councillor Blackmore. Mrs Matthews, did you get that? Yeah. Thank you. Could I have a show of hands, please? Those in favour? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14. Yes. Against? Abstentions? 1. Thank you very much. You can stay if you like or go, as you choose. I move that the public be excluded for the items set out in Part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified having